One free throw. 0 seconds worth arguing about, nothing on the line but pride and a bonus point in a game that was already halfway decided either way. And a 24-year-old guard, pointing at Larry Bird's chest in front of 14,000 people, daring him to shoot it with his back turned, because everybody in that building already believed he wouldn't. Boston Garden held 14,895er on paper. That Tuesday it held more than that, standing room 3 deep against the back rail, ushers giving up on the fire code somewhere around the second quarter. The parquet floor had dead spots every player on both benches knew by feel, patches near half court, where the ball came up flat instead of true, a floor so old it had its own private geography that never made it into any program. The broadcast truck outside had 2 cameras down for repairs that week, which meant the home feed was running tighter angles than usual, closer to the floor, close enough to catch faces instead of just uniforms. The visiting team was young that season, a roster still finding its shape, more athletic than disciplined, 12 games under 500 and still convinced every night was the night they turned a corner. Subscribe now if stories like this one are why you're here. There's another impossible night already lined up in the feed waiting for you. Their starting guard had decided somewhere around warm-ups that tonight was the night he introduced himself to the league at Bird's expense. His name was Wade Coloulton. 24 years old, in his second year, 6'5", with a frame he'd clearly spent the whole offseason building specifically for nights exactly like this one. He'd come out of a mid-major nobody scouted hard until his junior year, then torched 2 tournaments in a row and talked his way into every draft conversation that spring. He could really play, and that was the frustrating part for anyone trying to write him off early. Quick first step, a mean crossover, 22 points a night by December. But the mouth ran faster than the jump shot, and it had been running since the opening tip. He talked through the first quarter, low enough that only Bird could hear most of it, needling him about age, about the back surgery 2 seasons back, about how the highlight reels people still passed around were getting older every year, while Coloulton's were just getting started. For head, Urice. Bird missed 4 of his first 9 shots that night, which for him counted as a genuine slump, and Coloulton made sure everyone within 10 feet of the play knew he'd noticed. By the third quarter, Coloulton had a line he kept repeating, quieter each time, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd shouted it. Said the legend was mostly rumor at this point. Said a man who needed his eyes to make an easy shot wasn't reading the floor the way the old stories claim he used to. Said if Bird could really see the whole game the way people swore, the actual rim in front of him shouldn't matter much at all. Bird never answered any of it out loud. He'd nod the way a man nods at weather he isn't going to let ruin his afternoon, jog back on defense, set the next pick like nothing had been said at all. Anyone who didn't know him would have read that as retreat. Anyone who did know him understood he was doing arithmetic of his own, quietly, on a schedule nobody else in the building could see yet. The scoreboard stayed close through the third, trading small runs neither team could hold on to for long. Coloulton hit a step back, 3 with the shot clock dying, and stood over Bird a full second longer than the play required. Bird answered 2 possessions later with a fadeaway from the same corner. No words, no glance, just the ball dropping through and a jog back the other way that said everything it needed to without saying anything at all. With 4 minutes left in the fourth, Celtics down by 1. Bird caught an elbow fighting for position on a rebound and the whistle cut through the noise. 2 shots bonus. The kind of free throw that happens 40 times a night in every arena in the league and means nothing to the highlight package. Except Coloulton was still talking as Bird walked toward the line, loud enough now that the first few rows behind the basket caught every word of it. Said he'd bet the whole bench Bird couldn't make it blind. Said he wouldn't even need a blindfold for it to count. Said turn around then, old man, see if any of it still works when the rim can't see you coming either. The referee bounced Bird the ball. Bird caught it, dribbled twice, the sound flat and hollow off that dead spot near the line, and for the first time all night he actually looked over at Coloulton. Didn't say a word back. Just held the look for 2 full seconds, which in a gym running that loud felt considerably longer than it actually was. There's a particular kind of quiet that starts in one section of an arena and spreads on its own, no announcement required, just one fan elbowing the next because they noticed something a half second before everyone around them did. That's how it began at Boston Garden, starting near the visiting bench and rolling outward, row by row, as 14,000 people slowly stopped finishing their sentences at almost exactly the same moment. Because Bird had turned around. Not angled, not a shoulder tilted toward the rim the way a trick shot artist sets up for a camera. Fully turned, heels near the line, back square to the basket, facing the crowd, facing Coloulton, facing every last person in that building who thought they already understood what they were about to watch. The referee actually stepped forward like he might stop the play, then caught himself because nothing in any rulebook said a man had to face a particular direction to shoot a foul shot legally. Coloulton stopped talking, That was the first real sign something had shifted, because Coloulton hadn't gone quiet all night, not on dead balls, not during timeouts, not even when his own coach barked at him twice to get back on defense. Now his mouth was shut and his eyes were doing the same arithmetic. The whole building was working through at once. 24 years old, a full game of chirping behind him, and the only sound left coming out of him was his own breathing, audible even from the second row. The public address system read a substitution for the other end of the floor in a voice that suddenly sounded far too loud for the room. Somewhere in the upper deck, a paper cup ticked over and nobody moved fast enough to catch it before it hit the concrete. That's the shape this silence had taken. The kind where small sounds turn enormous simply because nothing else is left in the building to compete against them. Down on press row, a beat writer who'd covered the team for 11 seasons would say afterward he'd never once heard Boston Garden go that quiet during a live possession, not for an injury, not for a controversial call, not for anything he could remember in over a decade of nights spent courtside. The visiting coach was on his feet near the scorer's table, arms crossed, not calling a timeout, not saying a word to anyone on his bench, just watching along with everyone else because there was genuinely nothing left to coach against in that particular moment. Bird set his feet without looking down at them. Nobody in the building could see his eyes anymore, only the back of his jersey, number 33, facing 14,000 people who had all gone still within the same 6 or 7 seconds. He rolled the ball once between his palms, the same small ritual he ran through 1,000 times facing forward, except now, the rim he couldn't see had somehow become the only thing that mattered in the entire building. He'd made better than 80% of his free throws that season without needing to think about a single one of them individually. Muscle memory built across 2 decades, starting in a driveway back in French Lick, Indiana, where a hoop bolted above a barn door had absorbed more solitary hours than anyone had ever bothered counting up. The mechanics lived somewhere below conscious thought by this point in his career. Elbow, wrist, release, the same 4 inches of motion every single time, regardless of who happened to be watching, or which direction he was currently facing when the ball left his hand. That was the part nobody in that crowd understood yet. The part Coloulton had gotten exactly backwards without realizing it. He'd assumed the rim needed Bird's eyes to find it. What he hadn't accounted for was that Bird's hands had already found that rim 100,000 times before his eyes were ever required to do the job for him. Whatever city and state you're watching this from tonight, drop it in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled just to reach you where you're sitting. The ball left his fingers in a high, soft arc, spinning back toward a basket he wasn't looking at, rising above his own head and the heads of everyone crowded along the baseline who actually could see where it was headed the whole way. For a full second, it hung at the top of that arc the way every free throw does, that small suspended moment where an entire building holds still without meaning to, whether anyone up in the stands even likes basketball or not. It dropped through clean. No rim, no backboard, just net, and the particular hollow snap a ball makes when it never once touches iron on the way down. For one more second, nobody in Boston Garden made a sound, as if the building itself needed a moment to confirm what it had just watched before it allowed anyone inside it to react out loud. Then it broke everywhere at once. A wall of noise rolling down from the upper deck toward the floor, players springing up off both benches, the visiting coach shaking his head with something that looked almost like a smile he didn't want anyone catching. 14,000 people found their voices together after holding them for what felt like an hour, and had actually been closer to 7 seconds. Bird turned back around, unhurried, and walked to the same spot for his second shot the ordinary way, facing forward, like the first one had never happened at all. He made that one too, clean, no theatrics, and the crowd barely registered it beyond a polite ripple. Nobody in the building was talking about the second shot. Nobody would still be talking about the second shot years later either. Coloulton stood near half court with both hands on his hips, staring at the rim like it might explain itself to him if he just waited there long enough. He didn't say another word for the rest of the game, not to Bird, not to his own bench, not to the officials. His coach would tell a reporter afterward it was the quietest fourth quarter Coloulton had played all season, and nobody in that locker room needed to ask why out loud. Up in the broadcast booth, the color commentator went silent for almost 11 full seconds, an eternity by television standards, before he finally managed a single sentence, something about not having the words for what the tape would show once they got a chance to rewind it. The play-by-play man didn't try to fill the gap either. Some plays don't need narration laid over them. They just need the room to be quiet enough that people at home can hear what the building already heard live. Here's the part most retellings get wrong. People assume Bird did it purely to embarrass a rookie who talked too much for his own good. That's not really what happened out there. Bird had spent 3/4 being told his career was mostly reputation at this point, that the substance underneath it had quietly drained out while the highlight reel kept running along on its own leftover momentum. He didn't turn his back on the rim to humiliate Coloulton in front of a sold-out building. He turned around to answer the only real question that had actually been asked all night, which was never truly about trash talk in the first place. It was about whether the work underneath the reputation was still real, whether 10,000 hours in a driveway in Indiana still meant anything once that driveway sat 30 years and 600 miles behind him. Coloulton had wanted to know if the legend still worked without eyes on the rim. Bird gave him the only honest answer available to a man in his position, which was to remove the eyes from the equation entirely and let the hands do the talking in their place. It wasn't bravado. Bravado would have been shouting something back, calling the kid out in front of the crowd, turning the whole exchange into a spectacle built for someone else's highlight reel instead of his own quiet proof. What actually happened was closer to the opposite of bravado. It was a man choosing the coldest, quietest, most verifiable way to settle something, the kind of answer that doesn't need anyone's opinion attached to it afterward, because the ball either goes in or it doesn't. No interpretation required. No asterisk. Just a made shot that couldn't be argued with by anyone who'd watched it happen live. After the final buzzer, a reporter asked him straight out why he'd done it. Bird shrugged, already halfway into a plain gray t-shirt at his locker, not making any kind of production out of the answer. Said the kid wanted to know if he could still see the whole floor without actually looking at it. Said turning around seemed like the fastest way for both of them to find out for certain. The reporter asked if he'd ever practiced a shot like that before, in any gym, at any point in his career. Bird said no, not once, not even as a kid fooling around in the driveway back home. Asked if he was worried, even for a second, about missing it in front of a full building. Bird said worry wasn't really the word for it. Said a free throw was a free throw, regardless of which direction a man happened to be facing when he let it go, and the moment he decided that much was true, there wasn't anything left to be nervous about. He didn't smile when he said it. He didn't need to, and the reporter apparently didn't push for more, because there wasn't really more to give. Coloulton never talked trash to Bird again after that night, not in any of the rematches that followed over the years that neither man ever brought up much in public afterward. Teammates who were sitting on that bench still tell the story unprompted decades later, usually to rookies who don't quite believe it the first time they hear it, and they almost always start with the same detail, not the shot itself, the silence before it. Those 6 or 7 seconds where an entire sold-out arena stopped breathing at nearly the same moment, because one man had calmly turned his back on the single thing everyone in the building assumed he absolutely needed to see in order to succeed. Within a week, other locker rooms around the league had heard some version of it, the details drifting a little further from the truth with every retelling the way these things always do. By the time it reached teams on the other coast, some versions had him making it with his eyes closed too, or hitting it from the top of the key instead of the line, embellishments nobody who'd actually been in Boston Garden that night ever bothered correcting, because the exaggerations weren't really the point. The point was always the same 6 or 7 seconds of silence, no matter which city was doing the retelling. That's usually how the real ones go, not loud, not staged for a camera or a highlight package. Just a man quietly settling a question nobody actually needed answered, in the exact amount of time it takes one basketball to leave a hand and find its own way back home through a hoop it was never even looking at. Bird never brought the story up himself, not in interviews, not in the memoir chapters he'd write years later about the rest of his career. It simply wasn't the kind of thing he needed to keep telling people. He already knew what had happened in that gym, and for a man built the way he was built, that was always the only audience that mattered in the first place. If this one landed for you the way it landed for that whole arena, leave a like so it finds someone else who needs to hear it too, and subscribe if you want the next impossible night waiting in your feed the moment it actually happens. Because somewhere out there right now is another gym, another guard running his mouth a little too early in the game, and another man about to find out that some legends never needed their eyes on the rim to begin with.